So maybe I'll start by presenting Marina and first thanking everybody for being here. And if you'd like to turn off your cameras during the presentation, that's fine. If you want to leave them on, that's fine too. It's just nice to have a quick hello in visible person first. So to present myself, my name is Sarah Teitelbaum. I'm part of the CEF network, and I'm a professor in the sociology department. I'm going to do it all in English because Marina doesn't speak French. Is that okay with everybody if we proceed in English? Perfect.
Yeah. No problem.
Merci. And I teach in environmental sociology and I study forestry governance issues. I have a project with Marina for quite a few years, actually. We've been doing research together, most recently with regards to biodiversity and indigenous rights through the Forest Stewardship Council standard. So that's the work we've been doing lately. But Marina is going to present around an urban forestry research project that she's been working on for a few years and which I'm getting involved with as well. And to present Marina, she is a researcher at SLU, which is the Swedish Agricultural University in Skinnskatteberg, which is southern Sweden.
It's central part of
Central southern Sweden. She is studying issues around natural resource management, forestry governance, and also urban forestry, also issues of access to green spaces for new immigrants. She's also of Ukrainian background. She's associated with a university in Lviv, as well as in Sweden. And she has research projects on multiple continents, including Europe, Latin America, and Africa. So thank you for being with us today, Marina.
Thank you. Now I'm scared of myself after this presentation. Okay, thank you for this meeting. I will share my screen and start my presentation, if it's okay. Yeah. Do we see it? Yeah, okay. I would like to begin by saying that I am actually ambassador of my university because my trip is funded by the this kind of grants that exist at my university to encourage collaboration between researchers and also exchange to increase exchange students between Sweden and Canada. Therefore, if you want to visit Sweden and if you have partners in my university, I mean, you have to know that there is a funding, and also we have very good master programs for students. And if students because right now there's no good collaboration between and no student exchange between Canada and Sweden, particularly with the SLU. And this is why SLU really want to put in money funding to provide this opportunities for students to study in Sweden, and also that Swedish students would be able to move to Canada and study in Canada, as well as for researchers. This is like my ambassador speech from to show that to inform you that we have this opportunity. My talk will be about blue-green infrastructure for social cohesion. It's ongoing project which is funded by Swedish Research Council, and just I will give you some first brief description about the project idea, because this project is actually was funded under the call initiated by the Swedish Research Council, which was triggered by the governmental program in Sweden to improve living environment for urban inhabitants, and with particular focus on social integration, because Sweden is becoming very multicultural, and now approximately 20% of Swedish population is born outside of Sweden. And of course, these issues about social integration is very, very hot in Sweden now. Our idea with this project was to understand if green spaces as a public open spaces could actually be used for social integration of new Swedes with the society, In new Swedes, this is people who are born outside of Sweden. This is like a first wave of immigration. And it doesn't matter if they came to Sweden 30 years ago, or 20 or 10, still they are considered as a new Swedes because they are born outside of Sweden. And we are doing this research in 5 counties, or like regional regions in Sweden. Actually, we are trying really to do research with municipalities. It's still a bit difficult because people in municipalities are very busy, but at least we keep meetings on regular basis 2 or 3 times per year, because now it's the 3rd year of this project, and project will run for one and a half year more. We will finish, 2 more years, and then we will finish in 2025. And we organize meetings with municipalities. Now it's very good because it's very common now to organize meetings online. And we actually report results of our activities, we report our findings, and also present them what we would like to do, what our next step, and trying to get feedback. And this is going on, and this is rather on a way of to inform them what we do, it gets some kind of feedback, not more than that. But the interest in our research is very, very high. They really want to us to produce popular science publication, and also we promise to also make short films based on our papers, just to be able to communicate the research finding in a better way, more attractive way for general public. And this is, you see the map on the right side, this is where our municipalities are located and regions. We wanted to capture this kind of diversity of biophysical conditions across Sweden, because it's about green areas, and the idea was, okay, the green areas, the quality of green areas is different in terms of tree species composition, and also there are different phenological conditions because it's very long and hard winter in the north and much more mild in the south. And also those municipalities were selected because they have the highest proportion of immigrants. This is why we selected these 5 regions and also municipalities within these regions. Okay, the first step what we did is, because the initial plan was different, because we planned to begin with face-to-face interviews, like 100 interviews in each municipality with new Swedes, but then it became pandemic, Corona came, and then we had to change our plan. And actually it happened that it was the best solution actually to change the plan and to begin the work with like a nationwide survey. And the idea was to understand actually what factors affect people willingness to go to green space. I mean, why they go there and why they don't go there. I mean, what actually, and this is what the first issue, to understand what shape their behavior and what shape their willingness to visit, to interact with urban nature. And we did, and actually this is the aim, was to identify and analyze factors that shape the frequency of people's interaction in urban green space, because as you know, there are many studies that shows that green space is extremely important for our well-being, health, mental health, physical health, especially during Corona time and so on, which means those people who go there more frequent, they have better well-being, because, and therefore, if we want to improve people's health, mental health, we have to understand how to bring people to nature, not only how to nature bring to people, but also how to bring people to nature. And this is actually was the idea of this survey. And of course, there are different users, frequent users and infrequent users, and there is also some people in between. And frequent users, from our perspective, those who use green spaces every day, and infrequent users, those who almost never used or used by chance. I mean, they are not from this, it's a gradient, we captured the gradient from really nature lovers to nature tolerant people, tolerant people, and also different type of users in between. And we applied internet-based survey because, again, because it was Corona. And in order to develop the questionnaire, we did the literature review to identify a framework that would allow us to formulate questions in order to capture the broad spectrum of different factors, because green space visitation and usage are actually a topic of interdisciplinary research or multiple disciplines. This is human geographers, landscape architectures, also environmental sociologists, which means this is it's a topic which is studied from the perspective of different disciplines. And we wanted to identify a framework that actually captured all these different perspectives. And we found this framework, which was proposed by Farahani and Mahler in 2018. This framework, they developed this framework based on the very extensive literature review, which they did. It was proposed but never used. We were probably the first who used this framework to actually structure, organize the survey. And and that framework allows us to formulate like three main block questions. First, it's a block, the questionnaire was developed, and we've organized questions in three main blocks. So 4 blocks, I will tell it later. And the first block, it's about individual characteristic of respondents, it's sociodemographics, but also we introduced the scale to measure nature connectedness, because there is in environmental sociology, there is an approach to measure nature connectedness. There are some questions and people have to select questions, and based on their answers, we could measure how their sort of connectedness to nature. And then also it included self-reported preventions of green space usage, for example, lack of time, lack of knowledge, lack of company, and many others. The second block is about perceived characteristics of urban green space. It's, for example, what kind of benefits people associated with green space, also perceived availability, accessibility of green space, and also perceived problems in green space, like criminality, litter, and many other problems. And the third block, it's about preferences, and it contains questions on what green spaces people like to use, how they perceive green spaces should be in a more natural state, like or more modified with a lot of gray sort of elements, like in different kind of recreational infrastructure, many amenities, and also how they use green space and what kind of green spaces they prefer to use. And also we using GIS analysis, we identify external factors. It's already, when the survey was done, we also decided to test if external factors like biophysical conditions or like a population or proportion of built-up areas or population density also have effect on people, this kind of frequency of interaction with green space. Okay, this is 3 blocks of questions where they are in the questionnaire, and then we you see the map showing all municipalities from which we got responses, and we collected 2,806 responses, which is quite high number. And we did a lot of efforts to really spread information about the questionnaire, because we contacted municipalities and asked them to put on their website. We also contacted different organizations not all of them followed our request, but some of them did. And we also printed a poster and distributed this poster. We distributed around 200 posters across in different municipalities in Sweden, really to spread information and also to avoid biases, because at the beginning, of course, we used our professional network and our private network and also social media in order to some kind of spread information about the survey and also diversify respondents that are not related directly to us. This is why we did all these efforts. Okay, we collected this number of responses, and then we did exploratory multivariate analysis to actually do all kind of this, to identify these like explanatory factors that affect frequency of interaction with urban green space. And this is sociodemographics of our respondents. You see that it's captured quite diverse group of respondents, but at the same time it's biased towards women, because 64% of respondents were female or women, and also it's biased towards high educated people, because 73% are from university, and this is also the proportion which was important for us: 88% born in Sweden and 13% born outside of Sweden. again, it's biased towards those who are native Swedes. But actually, this region actually it reflects the proportion of between new Swedes and native Swedes, which exist in Sweden now, which is quite good. It's quite representative. But we did statistical analysis. We involved a very advanced statistician, and he made many different build different models in order to reduce these biases in our sample size. And therefore, it is biased, but not to that extent, which results are a little bit biased, but not high extent, because we try hard to avoid it. Okay, and there are some few results. First of all, our survey shows that actually people need different and multiple green spaces along urban peri-urban gradient, and it's obvious. I mean, it shows also that forest nature reserves are among top type of green spaces, which are preferred by total majority of respondents. And also the other places are also needed. I mean, it doesn't matter how many people actually selected, but the most important, they are needed for some people, for some group of inhabitants. And for example, about forest and nature reserves, they are in those this green space is located along peri-urban gradient. And from one side, it shows that, okay, if it's in peri-urban places outside of city borders, which is beyond their responsibility of urban green planners, then it's from one side, it shows that, for example, forest outside of city borders has high social values because it's appreciated by many, used by many urban inhabitants. And there are so many discussions about this multiple use forestry now in Sweden, that forests do not have only economic value, but also ecological. But this also shows that they also have high social values for urban inhabitants. And also nature reserves, it's not only important for nature conservation, not only for biodiversity, but also for people, because people appreciate nature reserves. It means that nature reserves, it also have high social values, which is also important for maybe those who advocate to make nature reserves. And it's not only important, again, for biodiversity, but also for people. But also it also shows that because this peri-urban gradient also important from the perspective of planning, green infrastructure or urban green space planning, which has to involve landowners outside of city borders. And because, for example, recreational use create a big conflict with landowners outside of city borders in Sweden. And for example, I got angry emails from 3 angry emails, because in the poster which we distributed was my email. And I got 3 emails from angry landowners that complained that this survey is actually based on the preferences and the from the perspective of urban inhabitants, but there is no any questions which actually address the concerns of landowners outside of city borders. Because I mean, why they have to use our property when they want, how they want, and there is no this kind of questions that relate what consequences this recreational use have on their land management activities, which means these conflicts exist. And of course, this kind of collaboration between city planners and the landowners outside of city borders are absolutely needed. But for example, in Sweden, it's almost impossible because urban planners, they're so busy with their daily activities and daily management of green spaces, and they don't have enough funding, enough resources, enough capacity even to go beyond the city borders, and also to have this strategical planning, because there is no strategical vision of how green spaces should be developed. It's just daily by day activity, day by day management. And this is one of the challenge also, to really maintain this urban peri-urban gradient in a more collaborative way. Then again, this is type of activities. Again, green spaces are needed for diverse, absolutely diverse activities. And it's not only walking or biking or running, which we see quite often, but there are many other activities which are important, maybe not so visible, but the green spaces are important. And what is strange that this wild food is important for people because it's among the 3 top activities in Sweden. I mean, I don't see often when people pick up berries and mushrooms, but it seems that it's very important for them, part of recreational activities. Also, yeah, it also shows if we reduce the number, the area of green space, we take out of people many opportunities to actually perform different recreational activities. Okay, and then it's about how people satisfied across Sweden with accessibility, availability, and quality of green spaces. In principle, many people are satisfied because actually Swedish planning rules that tells that people have to have green space in a distance at least 300 meters from their home, which is it's very high demand to really have green space around the places where people live. But at the same time, you see people satisfied only, we could say half of respondents satisfied with availability, which means maybe it's accessible, but not that what they want. Maybe it's exists the green spaces, but not what they want to visit. And then it's also supported by other answers to other questions, because we had the question about the distance to their most visited green space. And then 50% have 300 meters to the most visited, which is also a very high proportion of respondents. But other half have longer than 300 distance and 300 meters, and 20% the distance is up to from 1 to 10 kilometers, which means there is a question actually what availability of green spaces means. Is it to any green space or to that what people want? And accessibility and quality also, what quality means, yeah. And then we are coming to factors that we identify. In general, we tested 140 different factors, and we identify only 61 explanatory factors that really shape, to some extent, people interaction with green spaces or frequency of interaction. And they belong to 61. They are distributed among 4 domains, like personal characteristic, preferences, perceived, which I mentioned before, biophysical, which means it's in general, in order to understand people behavior, it's really a topic for interdisciplinary research. If you want to really understand how to bring people to nature, we have to understand all these factors and have to enhance some of them in order to increase this willingness to interact with green space. And then based on these factors, we actually identify profile of more frequent users and less frequent users. And you will see that profile is very, very different. More frequent users, they are more likely to be older, better health, higher formal education. You see this females born in Sweden, and it's more likely that their work will link to nature. And they also have a relatively higher level of nature connectedness. And the less frequent users, you see there's absolutely different profile, are more likely that they will be younger, poorer health, low level formal education, more likely men, and also people do our target group of respondents born outside of Sweden, and their level of nature connectedness is lower in comparison with more frequent users. Then again, more frequent users, they want to keep green spaces as natural as possible, in more natural state, not so much modified, and also to have some sport facilities and outdoor gyms. And they prefer also from one side very natural area like forest, nature reserves, wetlands, meadows, and also they use own garden or allotments. And they use green spaces for, again, different activities, more individual activities. And then if you look at the profile of less frequent users, okay, they want to have green spaces with many amenities, restaurants, cafe, benches, fountains, very modified. It's in totally different end of the spectrum. They also like lawn, playgrounds, sport facilities, and they perceive green spaces as the places for social interaction mainly. Then, of course, and if we are urban planners and we really want to increase interaction of people with green space, then the question is how to bridge these different groups. And from our project perspective, because the new immigrants are more likely to belong to this less frequent users, then the question, okay, if you want to increase interaction of less like a new immigrants with native Swedes, okay, what is a way? What green spaces could be as a hubs of this social interaction? And then again, more frequent users, there's some kind of understand that green spaces should be multifunctional. This kind of functions that it's important for their health, important for physical, mental health during Corona, and also provide source of wild food. And then they are more satisfied with quality accessibility of green spaces. They are more likely, majority of them don't see problem, but if there are problems, it's related to litter and graffiti, and more frequent users are more likely to reach green spaces by foot. At the same time, less frequent users, again, it's the main function of green spaces provide place for social interaction. And then they're less satisfied with quality and accessibility. They feel unsafe and they perceive that green space, perceive green space as a places with criminal activity related to danger or injury. And they are more likely to reach green spaces which they want to visit by public transport. Again, that's very different profiles of users. And again, it's like a position of urban planners between two extremes. Yeah. And then if you think about conclusions, that it's actually, first of all, multiple factors shape differences between users, and it's about what kind of green spaces they want, how they want they use the green spaces, how they perceive the functions, and what problems they perceive. And therefore, for us question is actually what green space, and it's clear that there is a difference between new immigrants and native Swedes. And the question is, I mean, how to make green spaces, what green spaces could be serve as the places for social integration, and also how maybe planning could be changed to make it more social inclusive, because there are many discussions now that urban green planning should be more social inclusive. And this is only from the perspective of recreational activities, but also, I mean, we know that green spaces are important for ecological functions, for environmental different functions. It has to provide many other ecosystem services, like supporting, regulating ecosystem services, and so on. And this becomes even harder problem, because have to combine all these as different ecosystem services and sustain them. Which are important for people and also for biodiversity. But we are now focusing only on this kind of social aspect. This is first study that we did. And then also if we develop another paper, this is, I'd say, promotion of the survey, because this survey is in English. If you want to repeat, we could repeat it also in Canada, because this kind of survey could be used for different research questions. Because now, for example, we develop another paper which is focusing on constraints to green infrastructure, green space usage. We took answers on the constraints, and then we also analyzed what factors are constraints, and to whom it constrains, who actually those who perceive more constraints to usage of green spaces. And therefore it could be, one could really understand how, for example, perception and preference affect the preferences for green spaces, or it could be have socio-demographic affect preferences and usage of green spaces, or it could be have perception of green spaces affect preferences for green space. I mean, it could be structured in absolutely different ways in order to produce and understand this interaction between people and nature in a more comprehensive way. That's a promotional story. Yeah, and then I will just finish very fast, because and then probably will be time for questions. And then the next step in which Sarah involved, we did face-to-face interviews now with new Swedes. Interview consists of 3 parts of questions, closed questions. We used SurveyMonkey software, and before interviews, people were asked to fill in some survey questions, and then it was open-ended questions with new immigrants, with new Swedes, what kind of areas they like, why, what they do, and so on. And also we mapped the most visited places by them, and those places that they like to visit. In total, we did 200 interviews with new Swedes across Sweden. And now Sarah and I, we were working to understand what kind of a framework we could use to understand how green spaces contribute to social integration between newsfeeds and society in general. Yeah. And there are some kind of examples of closed questions which we could get, because we in the paper we want to combine qualitative and quantitative data, because as usual qualitative research do not have some kind of information about respondents, but we would be able to provide information about respondents and also support it with the question with the qualitative data, and also this kind of mapping data. This yellow dots which you see, it's not so visible. It's actually those places that people like to visit the most. We also have this kind of special element, and we want to understand also their special preferences, why they select some places, what attracts them, and so on. Yeah. And then that was me. It's in. Thank you. It was brief information about everything what we did.
Thank you, Marina. Very interesting and informative presentation. Would there be any questions from the audience? You could speak up or raise your hand.
I do have one.
Okay.
So do you think, like, more specific, do you think that door-to-door to collect information would work on specific area? Like, let's say you want to know about a citizen that visit a special park somewhere, a green a green space, I mean. Would you recommend to maybe try door-to-door around this park to know what people think about this place, or what should you consider when planning in this park, depending on what people think around it? Do you think that will work, or would you not recommend it?
Well, it's hard for me to recommend, but I think that from one perspective, what we, based on the results which we got, I mean, there are some flagship green spaces that urban planners focus mainly. It's parks, forest, nature reserves, and they don't actually pay attention to many small green spaces like a pocket parks or alleys or many other places. I think this can, if you want to understand what people want in their area, maybe it's good to get it open. I mean, to ask what kind of green spaces do you want to have, in order, and then to understand actually what their needs is, and then to analyze the existing green areas in the neighborhood to understand if the demand of people actually correspond to what they have around. And then it could be some kind of discussions with planners. I think it's good to come with an open question, what they want, how they want to see. We ask question, how do you perceive your ideal green space? And actually, it was very, very interesting, because many people, some kind of came almost to the same type of green spaces what they want to have. And you know, then I found these places in Sweden. They're not so common, and it was really interesting that those places that many our respondents presented as ideal place, they are really heavily used. They are very good places for interaction. Yeah, which is the question is, it's good to probably come with open question what they want, and then to see what they have.
Okay. And I've seen that well, there's always a bias when you ask the people it's about green spaces. It's mostly universities respondents and relatively highly educated people. Do you have any idea or ways to proceed that you can try to diminish this bias?
Yeah, this is also a challenge that we had, and in order to we tried to, we also in many other publications which we read before, it was also there were also some kind of outcomes that women are more active, and also highly educated people are more active in surveys. Yeah, I don't have any some kind of secret weapon to I think if just to use probably many different ways to spread information about this survey. This is probably the way to really diversify the
Marina, you were also saying that when you did the interviews, you didn't go to the parks, but you went to like the groceries, outside the grocery store, or in a public place, or targeting not necessarily just the users of the area, but just people in general by doing the questionnaire in a different place than the actual green
Yeah,
space?
interviews we did in different places, but a survey, it was really about information about survey was really, it was biased in our case. And there are also tricks in statistical analysis, you could reduce these biases. But for example, we repeated the same survey in 3 Eastern European countries, in Armenia, Georgia, and Ukraine. And then we had another bias. Then there were people up to 45, from 20 to 45, actually the most the highest proportion, because they're using internet, which means those people who are not able to use internet. I mean, it really depends on the context. And suddenly we got so many respondents from people relatively young.
Okay, so I guess we have to try to be creative and try to understand the territory and also the people that respond to the survey in like a big picture, and try to be creative, I guess. And then another question, sorry about the mini question. So I did not really understood if it was a good idea to include peri-urban population in the survey. You said that some people were complaining about the fact that they weren't included, but would you recommend to try to reach these people?
Actually, we don't, I mean, people, we spread information about the survey, we spread all over in peri-urban areas and urban areas. I mean, and therefore people, and then people also wrote the name of their village or settlement where they live. And then we did analysis. Actually, the respondents came from settlements of different sizes, from small to large, like Stockholm or Göteborg or whatever. But we got a response. The concern was that we didn't include any questions about some kind of respect of rights of landowners. This is what the concern, that there was nothing about them, nothing. Their interest was not some kind of included in the survey, which is absolutely right. And it came too late. If we would be thinking about it, we will include something.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Alison.
Yes, thank you, Marine. That was really interesting. I have a question about because in Sweden, as elsewhere, the immigrants will be coming from different continents, from I can see there are quite a few African immigrants from Middle East, from Eastern Europe. Are you able to see or tease out differences in their attitudes and perspectives and what they would like in a green space between the different groups?
Yeah, we see this. We see the differences. Yeah, we see, but at the same time, we cannot some kind of we don't have enough evidence to really confirm that it is a difference. I mean, we hear there is a variation in how people use and how people perceive the green spaces. It's not very sharp differences. There is a gradient, and there is a gradient from using green spaces for family activities among people from Asia and Africa, but at the same time, those who belong to this group, they also have different preferences. They could also use it individually, not often, but they use it also individually. They use it with kids, which means there's not like a sharp difference. Okay, they use like this, and the other. It's a gradient in how they use green spaces, and also in some responses they're also saying that actually they change the way how they use green spaces when they come to Sweden, because we have this question. If they change this, they change, which means they said that they are walking much, they are biking. Some people say they learn how to bike. They also spend much time outside with the children, which means this is a way how they unconsciously maybe they change their behavior, and they accepted the behavior which Swedish population have. This is in a way also how green space help to integrate, because they change their behavior. I mean, which means in paper we want to show the diversity of respondents, but we don't want to relate their differences to ethnicity. We just want to show there is a range of preferences and usage but not related to specific ethnicity.
Maybe
Okay.
I can just interject
Mhm.
one
Yeah,
little
yeah.
question
Mhm.
because it's very related. What about the issue of winter?
Yeah, it's disaster. This is like, and people say they don't, I mean, it's really seasonal use for many of them, which is a problem. And the winter is dark and long, and many say that they cannot use green spaces, which means it's very seasonal. And when we ask, I mean, what could you trigger to get out in winter to green space? And they said if it would be common activity, which is actually organized now in Sweden. There are some activities, especially in the north, they organize, they really make a lot of efforts to bring people out of home, from their home in winter. But there's another issue that, I mean, in order to do it, you have to also dress properly, you have to have proper equipment, which is also a very big investment. And if you are not
Right.
so big fan, I mean, to buy everything for like a one-time activity, it's not. I mean, of course, there are some challenges related to this. But actually, we read interviews some with people, and I did interviews. I mean, people really happy with nature, because there are also prejudices that people from Asia and Africa, when they come to Sweden, they will feel a little bit scary because the nature is totally different. But we didn't find it. Absolutely not. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's really interesting. Thanks.
Thank you.
Danielle.
Oui, bonjour. Yes, I will just briefly present myself. I arrived a bit late. I'm Danielle Dagenet. I'm a professor in landscape architecture, specialist of green infrastructure. I'm actually going to Luli
Okay.
yes, to work with some colleagues later on this year. So a few questions. Actually, Alison just asked one of my questions, but two other ones. What is the indicator of proper integration of an immigrant in Sweden? Would that be that the immigrant is actually enjoying the winter? Would that be that they have friends that would be Swedish, of Swedish descent, or how do you measure integration? Because if you want green spaces to help integration, you have to be able to see the before and after, or, you know. Yeah.
Very good question. And actually, first we did, with my research team, we did literature review to understand how this social integration actually, in green spaces social integration, how it's studied and what actually evidence that how it helps. And we didn't find actually good evidence, because there are very general talks about that green space supports social integration, social cohesion, but there is no evidence. And this is actually what Sarah and I did during the last this week, in order to identify a framework that would help to measure somehow, not measure, but some kind of really to understand different dimension of social integration. And it could be Sarah, I will give you a word if you want.
Yeah. Well, and what we've been looking at more recently, and it's really, I would describe it as more exploratory than actually indicative. But basically, this framework we've been looking at by an author named Esser. Talks about 4 different types of factors supporting social integration. And one of them is interactional. So it really is this interaction within and amongst groups. Another one is cultural. Another one is, they call it sort of identification. So it's like connection to place, connection to institutions. And then there's a 4th one called structural, which is really having access to services, access to government, access to green spaces. So I think it's a pretty complete, sort of fairly integrative approach, but I don't think it'll tell you yes or no, is this person well integrated? It's more like look towards these factors to understand the extent to which the person might feel integrated because they have proper identity, interaction, and access to institutions.
Or that green space could support different dimensions. For example, green space could support interactional or cultural dimension of social integration, or structural dimension of green. And then and this allows us to increase resolution what actually social integration is about, and how different aspects of this social integration could be enhanced by green space. this is what we are struggling now with this. It's very interesting question.
Okay.
This is where we are working with the data because we have a lot of data. And actually data, when we went through the data, actually we could provide evidence for different dimensions of the social integration. It's very good.
That's good.
Mm.
And my last question is about the characteristics of the urban green spaces, or well, green spaces in general, that are well adopted or liked. I didn't see in your presentation, but maybe I was not paying attention at that time, but you didn't go into such specifics as whether you have large grassed areas, or do you have topography or not, and you know, those design details that might make a difference.
Mm-hmm. We actually, when we during this face-to-face interviews, we ask people first to name the most visited green spaces. They name the spaces, we map the spaces, and then we ask why they like to visit the space, each one by one. And then, of course, we cannot. I mean, we ask, okay, because I like nature, but what kind of nature? What exactly do you like? And they tell. Some were very talkative, and they were very. That's kind of, were able to describe what they want. Some of them were very short, but still we have this information. And also we ask, because when we map the polygons of green spaces, we ask, do you like to visit the whole green areas or specific places? And they also tell, okay, I like this specific place. And then we ask, why do you like this specific place? And what we want to do next step, because we want to analyze special information, because we want to, we could have satellite images or whatever, like a plan of these places where they like. And we could say, okay, people like maybe places which have different infrastructure, different amenities, but also forest and the lake or whatever.
And a lake and...
Yeah, we could construct some kind of model of green spaces that they like to visit.
But you
Okay, and this can be...
No, we didn't make analysis, but we have this data.
Yeah, because there's so much research going on in environmental psychology about what people like and all that. So you have lots of information also that could help you analyze, I suppose. Well, very interesting. Could you just put in the chat the link to the paper, the specific paper that that has the result with the results of your study, because I looked in Google Scholar and there was a list of papers, but not necessarily this one.
Yeah. We have two papers now which are in revision based on the factors, and they hope, because it's already second revision, if it's published, as soon as published, I will send you. And I have other papers based on green infrastructure, but it's different type. But this one is just in the revision. I will send you this paper.
Maybe people can put their emails in the chat, and then we can make a little list after, and Marina can send you.
Good.
Yeah. I could send you the presentation if you are interested, because I mean.
Yes, sure. Interesting for me and all my colleagues, I guess.
Thank you very much.
Alain.
Hello, Marine. Nice meeting you. Those are really cool results. I have a kind of a two-step question. I'm guessing the first step is not easy, but so I hear people go, and we've heard that before, I think, or it was maybe wishful thinking, I don't remember, but you have proof that people go to green spaces if they are close enough. And I saw 300 meters, for example. So I don't know if you've met people from municipalities making those decisions, but what would be the reaction to that? I mean, the easy answer is we need to increase the number of green spaces, but there's a trade-off to that, right? It goes against densification. And so I don't know, what are your thoughts about that? So if for example, increasing accessibility to park decreases natural spaces around cities because we need to expand cities, then this is not a win-win situation. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it just I mean, we are aware about all these discussions and also conflicts. It's a big conflict for land, of course, within the city borders and outside city borders. Yeah, it's a challenge, of course. It's a challenge to satisfy the needs. And in Sweden, actually, Sweden is good in this case, except the big cities like Göteborg and Stockholm and Malmö, where really densification, for example, Malmö is surrounded by agricultural land, which means it's really in a city is densified, and there are parks, existing parks becoming so crowded it's not green anymore, it's brown because there are so many people. But Sweden is actually has advantage because it's a forested countries, and outside of this Skåne area, then because cities are relatively small, majority of cities are very small in Sweden, but it's really a Swedish case and maybe a Nordic country case, which is harder probably in other countries in Western Europe. And then the travel distance to even forest, neighboring forest, is not so far, and you could reach by bike or by car and so on. But of course, within the city borders, it's a problem. It's a big problem how to actually keep green spaces and also keep cities within the borders. It's a challenge.
And I was also thinking in that direction. In older cities, it's unlikely, although it's been done, that we will destroy habitat for people, houses and buildings, in order to make room for parks. Maybe we should do that, but then we need to relocate those people. So I was thinking, are there ways that we can artificially reduce that distance by making the path to the parks easier and more walkable or more enjoyable, so that we could maybe increase that distance that people feel is okay for accessing green spaces.
Exactly.
Have people worked on that? I don't know.
Yeah, I think this is there are discussion. I read papers about vertical greening, for example. Maybe for Sweden it's not so relevant, but for Montreal, this part which is very built up. I mean, about vertical greening, that also building companies should be certified if they provide also vertical greening, which is very expensive. I mean, it's also probably then if you walk along the houses which has vertical greening, or at least street trees, then emotionally distance to green spaces will be shorter, even if it's long. I mean, it's very interesting. Yeah, we want to work. The last year we will work with urban planners, and the idea also to find the good cases actually of the green infrastructure planning, not only in Sweden but outside of Sweden, to understand how people actually deal with these questions about densification and keeping the green spaces, because green space is not only for people, it's for urban biodiversity, it's for many environmental services. We need green spaces, not only for people. Yeah, therefore it's a very good question and big challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Well, it's perfect time for lunch. Thank you to everybody who came. Very interesting. Thank you for the presentation,
Thank you for
Marina.
fantastic
Thank you very much.
questions.